mentioned it was similar to tobacco in terms of texture and flavor and texture profile. What would be the packing method? What would it be most similar to as perhaps an established brand on the market?
I would have to say probably Tangiers.
Okay.
So the way I like to do it and the way I recommend consumers is if you're packing tobacco alone, just cut up the shisha completely with scissors or a chopping knife. And you want to kind of get it to that semi-muddy consistency, because when you cut it up nice and fine, it's almost very grainy. And you just dense pack it in a bowl. So that's it. And you just dense pack it, poke about 3 to 4 different spirals of holes around the foil, light up 4 coals, and you're good to go. So exactly the same way you pack Tangiers, you do that exactly with tobacco. So.
And you recommend starting it with the 4 coals because it can take in a little more heat just because of how it was created, right?
Yes, yes. So the reason why we use 4 coals for packing tobacco is because the one ingredient that I decided to replace in normal tobacco-based shishas was actually the honey and the molasses. So if we kind of get into that, I think it's an interesting discussion. So honey and molasses, there's a specific aspect of chemistry called latent heat and specific heat. Basically means that it's more specific heat. How much heat can a certain substance take before it changes its temperature by 1 degree Celsius? So I took this concept, and what I did was I analyzed honey and molasses, and it had a lot of shortcomings. So it's a little bit watery. It's a lot more watery. It tends to caramelize at a lot lower of a temperature, and it also has a certain smell and a certain color to it as well, and a certain taste. So whenever you're smoking the shisha, you actually notice the taste of the honey as well. And I wanted to get rid of that completely. So and
I've noticed that actually across all different brands. If you smoke like an apple, if you smoke maybe a lemon, a very common fruit flavor throughout alfalfa, famari, etc. You're gonna taste differences, and it's part of the process. But it's also in part because they're using honey, they're using molasses, and with this, for example, we were in the back where you sniffing different flavors that you have. Your watermelon, I just took a sniff of it. I never really smelled such a pure, flavorful watermelon smell out of any other shisha brand. Just my own personal opinion, but it really comes through not only when you smell it, but then when you smoke it in. It's exactly the exact smell. It really translated across your taste buds, and when you're packing a bowl, I don't know about you guys, but I really want it to be exactly what I'm packing, and I'm anticipating that flavor, and it comes through 100%.
That's actually thanks to 2 things. It's the consistency of the recipes as far as the formula is concerned. So the formula is, let's say, a certain percentage of tea, a certain percentage of the sugar syrup, and the sugar syrup is the one that replaced the honey and the molasses that I developed myself. And
that's completely flavorless. And
yes, actually, getting back to the previous question real quick too. It's flavorless, odorless, colorless, and it's about twice the thickness of honey. So that's why it tends to have a much better heat retention as far as when you're packing it in the bowl. As far as the flavors go, again, mentioning it that I work with a supplier that supplies for the culinary industry. So their watermelon is essentially the oils and the juices of an actual watermelon concentrated into one bottle. And so when I use that to flavor my shisha, it's as natural as it could get. So.
Then one thing you had mentioned is that the honey and the molasses caramelize at a lower temperature. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Basically what happens is the sugars that are in honey and molasses, they are not the same sugars that I use in the sugar syrup that I've developed. What happens is there's sugars are basically, would you like it, Justin? Sugars are, in chemistry I call them CHO compounds. They have it's a molecule of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And usually the larger the molecule, the more heat retention it will have. That's what I've noticed personally. So the smaller sugars will be even glycerin is actually a form of sugar. So glycerin has a much smaller compound, that's why it tends to be liquid at room temperature. And then table sugar, let's say, is sucrose. See, C12H22O11. Don't ask me why I know this, but you know,
Is that on the packaging?
pretty much. So there's a lot of different things. There's like sucrose, there's glucose, there's dextrose, there's cellulose. I might not be pronouncing it correctly, but there's all these different OSE sugar-based compounds. And so what happens is the sugars that are inside honey and molasses, they have a specific burn temperature or a caramelization temperature. And upon my research, I found out what that temperature was, and I said, okay, what sugar can I get that is odorless, flavorless, colorless, that can replace this honey or molasses? And and that ended up being the sugar syrup that I've developed. It's kind of a little bit of an industry secret, but the one thing I could say, it's all food grade, it's edible. It comes in a powder form, but it's not the same thing as your table sugar, and I mix that with actually water, and I cook it at a certain temperature and everything, and I create the syrup out of that. So
everything's food grade. So I could eat some of your tobacco or tobacco. Sorry.
Essentially,
if I wanted to.
well, if the Surgeon General catches me saying that, he'll put me in handcuffs. But I'm not legally allowed to say that. But technically, what I could say, I can't even say it's healthier.
Yeah.
But what I can say, it's 100% natural. It doesn't have any of the chemicals or carcinogens associated with tobacco.
Right.
So I could say all those things. And is it healthier? Again, I cannot say. And I shouldn't probably recommend my consumers to eat the product. Even though, don't quote me on it, but you can, and nothing will really happen to you health-wise compared to what tobacco will
But
do
don't.
to you. But don't do that.
Don't.
You didn't hear it from me, so.